Warning, there will be spoilers to the following films: X-Men, X2, and X-Men The Last Stand. Now, let's move forward. I'm the Blockbuster Beach Bum, analyzing the films you may or may not have seen on the big screen, and I'm talking about a franchise that this year has turned 14 years old. That means it has lived through 2 Spider-Men, 2 Supermen, 3 Hulks, and by the time 2016 and all these other new movies come out, it would have lived through 2 different incarnations of the Fantastic Four and 2 different actors to play Batman. Yes, this franchise has been going for 14 years within the same universe. I hesitate to use the word continuity because of this franchise's infamous problems with continuity errors. However, I do think there is value in this franchise. Despite its faults, I think it boasts some of the best in superhero entertainment in the last couple of years. I'm talking about the X-Men franchise. This video, I shall discuss my thoughts on the X-Men trilogy, which includes X-Men, X2, X-Men United, and X-Men The Last Stand. Part 2 will feature my thoughts on X-Men Origins Wolverine, X-Men First Class, and The Wolverine. The third video will feature my review of X-Men Days of Future Past, releasing nationwide May 23rd. So, welcome to the future. X-Men, released in the year 2000. Now, something I need to establish with these movies, they're not very faithful to the source material. In fact, after looking at the trailers for X-Men Days of Future Past, it amazes me that it took so long to get an incredibly colorful X-Men film. The other ones are most of them are very dark looking. They look kind of like, Millennium type of movies where it's just like, oh my god, everything is serious. But at the same time, it's not really on the level of like Dark Knight where everything is brooding. No, this is a comic book franchise where there's fun, but also social commentary being put into the film. X-Men has always been kind of a sort of angle for social commentary on things like civil rights and gay rights and things of that nature. In fact, the first X-Men film opens up with a flashback sequence, prologue sequence that takes place in a concentration camp, detailing the suffering of one Eric Lensher, who will be played by Ian McKellen in this film. Eric Lensher is more commonly known as Magneto, the Master of Magnetism. And then we get a scene where a girl's having, is hanging out with a boy. They have an embrace, and the boy is having like a seizure, where it's like it feels like he's dying because of her touch. This isn't treated like, oh my god, I got bitten by a spider, I'm flipping around, hooray. No, it's like the superpowers that they have are not happy, and they're either that or they're not getting the powers or discovering their powers in the most positive environment. I think that's what I really like about the opening of this movie. Now the basic plot goes something like this. You have Magneto. He wants to he has a machine that will make all humans into mutants, and the X-Men realize that this is dangerous and they must stop Magneto. One of my favorite action scenes in the film takes place like on the train station. They're trying to get Rogue, played by Anna Paquin, and because she's the key to this machine that Magneto wants to, make all, humans into mutants. He thinks that's the key because she can absorb powers, and that will help him start up the machine, because using the machine will kill whoever's using it. So he's going to give his powers to Rogue. That way she'll be they'll force her to use her powers and activate the machine, basically. It's a bit convoluted, I know. But it takes place in like a real enough location, and it's not like they're in ultra colorful costumes. They're not wearing like red capes and, like they're not wearing like this cheesy looking armor. It's not like the X-Men comic books where they're wearing like bright spandex. No, they're a bit more covert, I guess you could say. They're wearing black leather, which can be a little dull in terms of costume design, but I guess that's just the way they felt like doing it for a bunch of movies. I hope in the future we get X-Men movies with better costume design. However, with that in mind, these movies are well cast for the most part, at least the major roles. You have Hugh Jackman as, of course, Wolverine. I'm not going to say he plays Wolverine as, as accurately as he is in the comics. Wolverine is a bit gruffer, a bit angrier, and he's a bit more like an animal. Hugh Jackman's a bit treating it more like a tragic character, or not passive aggressive, but just the way he is, he's not as gritty, if you will. However, he's more like Wolverine in this film than he was in the later X-Men films, which I'll get in that later. He does give a good performance anyway, and one of my favorite scenes is like the cage match in the beginning where he's at like he's like this bar, and everyone's trying to beat the Wolverine and nobody can beat him. And you hear like this cheesy like clank because he's the adamantium skeleton. And, it's really cheesy, but it demonstrates the point that there's something unique about him. And when he sticks out the claws, great moment in the movie. That is a definite like Wolverine moment. And then he leaves. Who else is... Okay, Patrick Stewart as Professor X. Professor X is the leader of the X-Men, and he's rather good as this leader character. And he's perfect. He visually looks perfect as Professor X. And then you have Ian McKellen as Magneto, which is kind of an older choice for back then to pick him, but he's perfect. He's of course one of the best actors alive right now, and as he was back then, and still is just one of the greatest actors to ever live. And he just the thing I love about the Magneto Professor X dynamic is that of course I'm rooting for the heroes, but at the same time I understand where Magneto's coming from, and that's what I like about these X-Men films, is that unlike other villains where it's like, or I only like them because the actor is charming or something, I like them because their motives are clear and you're like, I can see, being like that. It's not like a lot of the villains in the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies outside of Loki where I'm just like, whatever, man, I could care less about you. Whereas Magneto, I'm like, that's a character I'm fully invested in just as much, if not more so, than our main heroes. And then you have, moving away from that, one of their best scenes in the whole movie is in the beginning where they're talking to each other. It's like in front of the Senate, I guess, where Jean Grey, played by Anna Famke Jensen, is presenting, like the Mutant Registration Act shouldn't happen. And then, Professor X and Magneto have this argument, and, he tells Professor X, we're the future, Charles. And that's the way he looks at it, because, he looks at mutant kind as the next step in evolution. He doesn't believe that they could really coexist. They have to be separate, or, the mutants just take over the world type of deal. I'm the quote-unquote better man, so I should be able to have have the world, basically. Other casting things, Famke Jensen, like I said, she's great as Jean Grey. It's just she doesn't get a lot of scenes. Same thing with James Marsden, who is also in Superman Returns, directed by Bryan Singer. He's good as Cyclops. He's perfect. It's just the movie doesn't use him well. I think I can't blame that 100% on Bryan Singer. I have to blame that partly on the studio, because from what I've heard, the studio's made cuts to this film. But also I have to kind of say that they could have made this more accurate to the comics, as I've heard that Joss Whedon had a draft of the screenplay that they kind of rejected. And Joss Whedon wrote Astonishing X-Men, or at least I think Astonishing X-Men might have come out after the first X-Men film. I'm not sure, but Astonishing X-Men is great. Read it. And Joss Whedon, I'm glad he's in a better place now. He made the Avengers, and now he's going to direct Avengers 2. Awesome. So, I think, like I said, I think those two characters are good. It's just they're not given enough to do in the first film. Same thing with the other films. Anna Paquin, I think, is good as Rogue. She's not like the Rogue from the comic books. A lot of people have a problem with that, and they say she's the worst thing ever. And I'm like, I like what her performance is. She's a character where it's like she doesn't have the ridiculous like flying powers and superhuman strength and the absorbing powers like Rogue from the comics. She's like, okay, I can absorb powers, but like that sucks. I can't have intimate contact, which the Rogue from the comics did have, but she was a bit more over the top. And I like that this is a bit more. I know people don't like the teen angle of Rogue, and I'm like, I don't mind honestly, because she's kind of like the audience surrogate. You know, she's kind of the young character that's, you know, being thrust into this new world of like all these different mutants and the X-Men and such, you know. That's how we're able to digest that, I guess. I guess that's how I would say it. Rebecca Romijn as Mystique, I think is great. I think the naked look, I don't want to sound like a pig or anything. I think it works for Mystique practically because like you have to concentrate to change your clothes too, I would guess. So her shape-shifting abilities and her being naked makes sense. And she's just a very, threatening presence on screen. You don't know what she's going to do next. She's just a really fascinating presence in the film. The one cast member I do have to complain about is Halle Berry as Storm. I'm not trying to say she's like the worst actress of all time, but she's not Storm. Storm, I felt, was a stronger character than that, and they really could have done a better job of having. You could have had a better Storm, is what I'm trying to say here. And yeah, that's all I really have to say about the cast, because there's not much else I can really say to that point, except I think it's a solid action film. There's some of the action, especially the scene on Liberty Island, really works. There's some nice scenes with Toad, played by Ray Park, and you have Sabretooth, who really does look like a pretty cool version of Sabretooth. I believe was played by like a wrestler. But unfortunately he gets like knocked off. And of course the X-Men save the day. But what I like about this movie is that this is a team of heroes that they're not loved by the public. This is a team of heroes that they're kind of hated, but they have to do the right thing. And that's what I love about them. That despite their qualms about humanity, they have to be the better man and the better person rather, and do the right thing and save people. And that's what I like about X-Men. This is the first X-Men film. It's a solid, entertaining superhero film. Not the best, but not bad. Now we move on to the film that introduced me to the franchise, X2 X-Men United. Also directed by Bryan Singer, the film was of course a bigger budget and, in fact, is better than the first X-Men film. Of course, I think all the cast members who return are great. Famke Janssen, James Marsden gets even less time as Cyclops. You have Ian McKellen as Magneto once again, Patrick Stewart as Professor X. Hugh Jackman's Wolverine isn't as Wolverine-y in this movie as he was in the first movie, but he's still good. Anna Paquin's still struggling. The guy who plays Pyro, I forget his name. He works as a character who's kind of like on the edge. He is an X-Man, but he wants to join the Brotherhood. Rebecca Romijn returns. We get Alan Cumming as Nightcrawler. Now, from detractors of the film, I have heard that this is their favorite part of the whole franchise, is the opening scene where Nightcrawler attempts to assassinate the president. And Nightcrawler is not a villain in the comics. He is, he's an X-Men character. He's an X-Man, basically. And he's kind of mind controlled in this, I guess you could say. Like the main villain in this film kind of controls his mind for a period of time, and a couple of other mutants. But Alan Cumming brings like a level of humanity to this movie that I think we kind of needed more of a character like him in the first movie, and we definitely needed somebody like him in the third movie. But I'm just glad he's in this movie, because Nightcrawler is just one of my favorite characters in general, and to have him portrayed on screen so well is just a wonderful thing. Now, is he like the fencing, like really fun Nightcrawler? No, he's the religious Nightcrawler. He's the more solemn Nightcrawler who has faith in God and stuff, and he's just a great character. And like I said, the opening action scene is awesome. But who really steals the show here is Brian Cox as William Stryker. People complain and moan that, it's not like Stryker from the comics, but you know what? I don't care. This character is fascinating. This guy is an anti-mutant bigot, basically. and he just wants to eradicate all of mutant kind. And he has his own emotional reasons why he wants to destroy mutants, and you don't sympathize with him, but you understand where he's coming from. But at the same time, you just want this bastard to die. Like, nothing will satisfy you more than this guy's death, which sounds like a horrible thing to say, but he really is evil. And this is one of the few movies that gets the two villain concept right. Like, there's so many superhero movies, like Batman and Robin, where you have Mr. Freeze and Poison Ivy for no reason, and they both want completely different goals. One wants to freeze the world, the other wants to make plants. And yet they're working together. Whereas in this movie, you have Stryker and Magneto. Magneto wants to kill off all of humanity. But you have Stryker wants to kill all of mutant kind. They don't team up. If this was made like in the 90s by Joel Schumacher or somebody like that, they would inevitably team up and then, just be like, I want to kill humans. I want to kill mutants. Hooray, let's work together. It'd make no sense. I like that these two characters, it's like, oh my god, either way, we're screwed. Because one of them wants to exterminate one portion of the population, the other one wants to exterminate the other portion, using Professor X's Cerebro. Because apparently if you concentrate too hard while using Cerebro, you can kill people off. And that is scary. That is a scary thought. Now, something I forgot to mention when I was talking about X-Men was the Wolverine origins aspect, where you get the adamantium skeleton. This is what I liked about the first two X-Men films. They kind of piece it like in the first film a little bit, and then the second film they kind of touch upon it a bit. And it wasn't like, just like slam in your face, oh my god, this is it. No, it was just like kind of brief flashbacks. And those scenes are really painful to watch when he gets injected with the stuff, with the adamantium. And it really works out very well. Which, speaking of which, the action scene where he fights off Lady Deathstrike, which that's probably one of my biggest qualms with the movie, is that Lady Deathstrike's not a very interesting character. But when they fight, then they stab each other and stuff, and when Wolverine ultimately beats her, it's pretty graphic. And from what I've heard, this was originally supposed to be a rated R movie, but they cut out some stuff to make it PG-13. And when I was like 9 or 10 years old when I saw that, I was like, oh my god, what is going on? Because I was used to Spider-Man, whereas this Spider-Man was just like, yay, Spider-Man. And then you have this movie where it's just like so painful, but I enjoyed it, but it was like painful to see these characters in pain. Good god. Halle Berry isn't back in this film. Not much else I can say about her except huzzah. And that's really it. Also, this film ends off with a cliffhanger where it's like, okay, we're gonna get to like the Phoenix or Dark Phoenix arc in the next movie. And I'm like, okay, fine. And it's kind of like The Dark Knight or like other superhero movies where I feel like the second movie ends in a really good spot, and then the third movie kind of ruins that potential. And that is what happens when you get Bryan Singer out of the franchise and you enter Brett Ratner with X-Men: The Last Stand, which takes pieces of Joss Whedon's astonishing X-Men, more particularly the inclusion of Beast and the mutant cure, where you inject it and you don't have mutant powers, or you don't have the X gene anymore, or whatever. And when I was excited for this as a kid, and when I saw it on the big screen, I wasn't disappointed, except for one moment. But I was just so excited. I was just like seeing stuff all over, like mutants attacking each other and stuff, and it was like, oh my god, this feels like the be-all, end-all. Oh my god, that character could lose their powers. Oh no. As a kid, I cared about that stuff. But as I got older, I realized this movie's not very good. It's one of those superhero movies where I wouldn't put it on like the worst list. I would put it on the mediocre list of things like Spider-Man 3, Amazing Spider-Man 2, Man of Steel, where they're like, there's good stuff in them, but I'm like, you wasted that potential. And that is waste potential. But there are good things. But let me just mention, the biggest tease of my life was the inclusion of the tease of the Sentinels. In the beginning, there's like this battle scene where it looks like the end of the world or something, and you see like this giant head with like the big lights, and I'm like, oh my god, the Sentinels! Sentinels are giant mutant hunting robots. By the way, featured in the comics that will be featured in X-Men: Days of Future Past, which I'm very excited about. But Wolverine cuts its head off, and then that's it. And it rearranges itself, and it's actually just the danger room. It's a training room. It's a training exercise, and I'm like, oh my god, the hell! I was so mad. And then also that Nightcrawler isn't in this movie. Apparently there's some sort of thing that happened. I'm not going to talk about it. Nightcrawler should have been in this movie because of all the hopeless things that happened in this movie. You really needed a hopeful and religious presence like Nightcrawler to appear. Now, this story basically has the Dark Phoenix arc, the Phoenix, but she has like a dual personality type of deal. And Magneto thinks, you know what? I'm going to use her as a weapon. And apparently that doesn't work out so well for him because she's killing off everybody at the end of the movie. And I'm like, it's like, what were you expecting, Magneto? Did you seriously expect she would, be controlled? No, you didn't. It's like Magneto's plans in this movie. Magneto's like a buffoon in this movie. And it's like, oh my god. It's so lame. And then, I'm trying to think something, there's a lot of bad things. There's like, you have Callisto, who's kind of like Storm's like rival in the comics. She has like the powers of Quicksilver, Callisto, and like another character. And it's like, why? Why are you putting all these powers together? There's enough characters in the X-Men universe where you don't have to. Just don't do that. And then the Juggernaut is in there. And the Juggernaut is a piece of fan service that I will not quote because you all know it. If you don't know it, look it up on YouTube. And it's just kind of stupid. Anything else I like about this movie? Ellen Page as Shadowcat. She's the most memorable Shadowcat out of the three we got in this original trilogy, because apparently each movie there's a different Shadowcat for some reason. And then, in fact, Bryan Singer was impressed by Ellen Page so much that he used her for Days of Future Past. Hooray! Which is awesome. I'm glad we're getting Ellen Page because she's a good actress. But the best part of the movie, the thing that steals everything, is Kelsey Grammer's Beast. His makeup, first off, is perfect. His mannerisms, the way he says his dialogue is perfect. I have no problem with Beast's character in this movie. Beast is awesome. And I'm like, this was the best part of the movie. I wish he was in a better X-Men movie. God. And then you have, after Beast, who else? Who do you have now? That's like, okay, you have Hugh Jackman as Wolverine again, and yeah, he's kind of the main character, and, of course, he has to save the day, and when he is, like, getting disintegrated and recovering at the same time while battling Jean Grey, I'm like, that is so stupid. I know he's a healing factor, but it shouldn't be that powerful. You're making Wolverine into a god, which he's not. I think Wolverine has an adamantium skeleton, he's got a bit of strength, he's got the claws, but he isn't completely invincible. Oh my god, I hate this movie. I think I'm really convincing myself more and more that this is the worst movie, but I won't talk about the worst X-Men movie until next week's video. Oh, yes, and the deaths in this movie. You have Professor X and Cyclops get killed off. Now, this could have been effective, but they just kind of rush and move on from their deaths. It's like, whatever, man. It's just like, oh, Cyclops dead. Professor X is dead, like, not even halfway through the movie. And it's just like, why? There was no reason. It has entertaining action scenes, some decent performances, but as a whole, it's a mess. It's got a lot of stupid plot points. It kind of fails to live up to X2 or X-Men, and it's just not a very good movie. And I think it was kind of the start of, like, the decline for X-Men for me. So then, it will lead us to next week when I will discuss X-Men Origins Wolverine, X-Men First Class, and the Wolverine. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next week.